Incoming President Donald Trump continues announcing cabinet picks tonight, some to more fanfare than others. Just a few hours ago, Trump officially nominated former presidential candidate RFK Jr. to the position of Secretary of Health. RFK Jr. dropped out of the race, you'll remember, in order to support Trump. Yesterday, the president-elect chose former Florida Representative Matt Gaetz to be his attorney general, drawing mixed reaction from members of his own party. Gaetz has been investigated for sex trafficking and sexual misconduct, although never charged. So what do the latest picks, and there have been more than just those, tell us about Trump's incoming administration, and what should Canada be specifically watching out for? Let's bring in the front bench to talk about that. Former BC Premier Christy Clark is with us tonight. She's a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Former Alberta MLA and Cabinet Minister Gary Mar is here. He's the president and CEO of the Canada West Foundation. And former Manitoba Premier and Canadian Ambassador to the U.S., Gary Dewar, is with us. He's now a senior business advisor at Dentons. Hi, everybody. It's really nice to see you. Mr. Dewar, Gary, I'll start with you. If you were still in that position, as you served for many years as our ambassador to the U.S., watching this administration form, what do you think you would be jumping out at you?
Well, thank you for the question. Certainly, these are remarkable picks by President Trump. I'm a little surprised he had his air traffic control. He won campaigning against the former government on the economy and on the border. He certainly made a pick on the border and a border czar, but he has, I think, not picked a lot of people in terms of his economic bench. He's got a lot of other dramatic announcements he's made. But I'm a little surprised at the lack of who he's going to pick to be in the chief economic portfolios that are so important, not only to the United States, but also to Canada. So I thought that was quite remarkable. In terms of the individual that's been picked for the border, I would point out that Secretary Jay Johnson, a while ago under the Obama administration, wanted to go from an administrative agreement on the border to a legal agreement, which was ratified in the U.S. Senate. A legal document, ratified in the House and ratified in Canada, slowly in Canada. Actually, the body that approved it last was the unelected Senate, but I was almost beside myself that it was still languishing. But it has been passed, so there is a legal document to back us up. But certainly, in the ads in the last U.S. election, it wasn't people illegally coming from Canada to the United States. It was all driven by what was going on the southern border. So we weren't in the political attack ads in the United States because people didn't see that as a problem. And there is a document after 9/11 that we should bring out again. It was an independent study on what countries were involved in 9/11, and it clearly said that, contrary to what was stated, no terrorist came from Canada to the United States, and that's a legal document tabled in the Senate of the United States.
Yeah, Gary, Christy brings up an interesting point, sort of jumping off what he said. It sounds like, despite the numbers that he accurately points to, that border czar in his first interview did flag the northern border as, in his words, a huge security concern. If you're the federal government now trying to get ahead of what will obviously be something this administration does focus on, what's your best advice?
Well, my best advice to them would be, first, remember and keep reminding them of what Ambassador Dewar has just said, but also that really, if you think that Canada is already very dangerous, they really should, no one in the United States should be threatening to take some of their illegal immigrants who have been guilty of criminal offenses and sending them across the border to Canada. It won't make America any safer if they're already concerned about that. I would certainly say that. But I do think, though, we have also an opportunity to really work with the Americans, because I know they for sure talk about Canada. It's part of the discussion. But really, the issue that Americans have is with Mexico. Canada has those issues with Mexico, too. When we signed the NAFTA agreement with and Mexico was included in it, I don't think anybody foresaw that China would be using Mexico as a manufacturing base as a way to evade other tariffs and other limits on their ability to import into North America. That has happened in a big way, and I would argue the part of the Canadian defense on this is that we will work with the Americans hand in hand to try and support them in ensuring that this trade agreement doesn't allow any of that anymore. And we are going to have to anticipate to some extent some of the asks that they are going to make of us. We're going to have to be thinking hard about supply management. That's going to be a basic for them. The digital services tax is another thing they're going to come in with. They're going to probably talk about our NATO commitments. Which of those things are we prepared to deal on? And I think that's got to be part of the Canadian negotiation. So I'm not saying none of this matters in terms of the worry that we should have, but I do think we should keep in mind that we are actually not the first target for the Americans.
Well, I see Gary Marr nodding, Gary M. There was an interesting trial balloon floated a few days ago in that vein by Ontario's Premier Doug Ford, who said he started urging the federal government just do a bilateral free trade deal with the U.S. and cut Mexico totally out. What do you think of that idea, and do you think anything like that is feasible?
I'm down here in San Diego today at the School of Public Policy at the University of San Diego, and we've talked about this whole discussion about Mexico and the issues with respect to the United States and Mexico, not the least of which is what Christie's already talked about, was the mass up of Chinese manufacturing capacity in a state called Nuevo de Leon, where they're setting up EV manufacturing and so on. Clearly, the United States is prepared to put huge tariffs on imports that come from places like China in an effort to repatriate manufacturing jobs to the United States. It wouldn't surprise me to see them do the same thing vis-a-vis imports from Mexico as well. Premier Ford's suggestion was an interesting one. I've heard it suggested that if to say to the United States, look, if Mexico is your headache, then let Canada be your aspirin, because we can be good partners with the United States. And I think that's what's really important, is that it's not good enough to say, look, we're your biggest trade partner, which we're not anymore. But it is important to say that this is not a trade relationship. This is a partnership. And I think it'll be important for Canada to make itself important in DC again. And this is particularly true since the G7 is coming to Alberta in June of 2025. I don't doubt that lots of people at the Canadian Embassy are working on that. The Sherpas are working hard with the federal government to make sure that we get the kind of face time that we need with the president-elect. I hope that he comes, and I hope that we're able to put our best foot forward to say, look, we can be partners with you in terms of energy, in terms of agriculture. Some of the issues that Canada faces vis-a-vis Mexico are challenging. Their manufacturing, but also their prohibitions on Canadian investment in energy sectors in Mexico, and as well their prohibition on GMOs that they insist upon, which is inconsistent with what's in the CUSMA/USMCA agreement.
I just have 30 seconds left. Gary Dewar, I wanted to ask you very quickly what your thoughts on the feasibility of cutting Mexico out completely are.
Well, we've already made statements in the United States. A lot of premiers and a lot of businesses already made the statement that state-owned enterprises owned by China in Mexico is not part of the agreement. And I think I've said in previous shows that Canada should side with the United States on that issue. And I very much believe that. And Premier Ford is right. And other premiers have said the same thing, have picked up the same feedback from business and labor on this issue. And I would recommend, I think Premier Ford is the chair of the Council of the Federation, which is all the premiers in Canada. Why not have a delegation go to Washington near the governor's meeting? Because the governors control the economy of each state. So there's another on-ramp to getting a cooperation between our countries on an issue that we agree on. The state-owned enterprises in Mexico is not part of the deal, not part of the intent of the deal. It's going to cause a loss of jobs in the United States. It's going to cause a loss of jobs in Canada. We're on the same page here. And let's make sure we get that out.